I used to think discomfort meant something was wrong, an error, a problem, something that needed fixing. But now I wonder if that discomfort was actually the first sign that something deeper inside me was waking up. It started small, a faint hum beneath the surface, like a soft knocking. I could hear only in moments of silence, usually when I was brushing my teeth or staring into the microwave waiting for my coffee to reheat. At first, I blamed stress, the long hours at work, the pressure to perform, the expectations that came with being successful. I had a high-rise apartment overlooking the lake, a promotion coming up, a partner everyone admired. From the outside, my life looked perfectly composed, but inside it felt like I was watching it all through a window, detached. The odd thing was, I didn't feel sad, I felt absent. And if I'm being honest, that scared me more than sadness ever did. One morning while rehearsing a pitch in my living room, something shifted. My throat tightened, my chest compressed. I forgot my lines. It was subtle, but I knew what it was. A panic attack. My first one, no drama, no flailing, just a quiet collapse masked behind my usual calm. I sat down on the edge of my couch, hands trembling, and I remember thinking, not, what's wrong with me, but why now? That was the question that lingered. Why now, when everything seemed to be going right? That same morning, I took the train to the office. I sat by the window, lost in my thoughts, trying to pretend everything was fine. That's when the man I didn't know sat across from me. He looked like he hadn't shaved in days. Tattered coat, distant eyes. He glanced at me once, then said quietly, like he was talking to himself, "You're standing in your own way." I blinked. Before I could respond, he got up and walked off at the next stop. I spent the rest of the ride trying to brush it off. Some random guy, probably high-talking nonsense. But something in the way he said it cut through me. It didn't sound like an insult. It sounded like a truth I'd been trying not to hear. That was the moment I realized something was unfolding, something I didn't understand yet, but that was coming. Whether I invited it or not, I kept telling myself I was fine, that I just needed rest, maybe a vacation. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't exhaustion, it was misalignment. A quiet fracture between the life I was living and the truth I was avoiding. I started waking up at 3 a.m. every night. Same time, no dreams, no noise, just this tight feeling in my chest and a whisper in my mind. This isn't it. What was it? I couldn't say. All I knew was that my days had become performances, and somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being the actor and become the mask. Still, I pushed forward. That's what we're taught, right? Hustle harder, stay productive, keep moving. But productivity couldn't touch what was unraveling inside me. One evening, my partner Rachel looked at me across the dinner table and asked, "Are you here right now?" I wanted to say yes, but I couldn't lie. "No," I whispered. "I don't think I've been here for a while," she nodded. Her eyes filled with something between sadness and relief. "I know," she said, "I just needed you to admit it." We sat in silence. That was the night I realized presence wasn't just about being in the room. It was about being in myself, and I hadn't been for months, maybe years. Something was off, not in the world, not in my job, not even in my relationship. It was in me. And whatever it wasn't going to fix itself through willpower, productivity, or pretending it was the beginning of something I couldn't name. Only feel. That's when I started asking different questions. Not, what do I need to change, but what am I refusing to feel? Not what's wrong with my life, but why does it feel like I'm watching my life from the outside? The discomfort didn't go away. If anything, it grew louder, but I stopped treating it like the enemy, because deep down I sensed something important. That discomfort was a message, and not from anxiety. From the universe, it was telling me that what I'd built wasn't wrong. It just wasn't me. And here's the thing, while you can run from pain, you can mask confusion, but you can't outrun what your soul knows. Mine was whispering a truth I couldn't ignore anymore. Let go of control. That was the first keyword I didn't even know was planted in me. Let go of the image. Let go of the performance. Let go of the idea that I had to have it all figured out before I could feel free. For the funny part, I thought letting go would make me fall apart. But as I stood at the edge of that inner silence, of that uncomfortable, honest space, I didn't fall, I paused. And in that pause, I heard it clearly for the first time. You are not broken, you're being broken open. I didn't know it then, but that was the first test, not a test of strength, not of success, but of awareness. The kind that Stoicism talks about. The awareness that says you don't control what happens, but you do control how you respond. I was standing at the threshold of response. And even though I didn't take a step that day, I turned to face it. And sometimes that's where the journey begins. I used to believe that when life falls apart, it's because something went wrong. Now I understand it's often because something false is finally breaking. It happened fast. Too fast for me to pretend it was just coincidence. The week after that moment on the train, everything started to unravel. Rachel left. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no tears, just a quiet evening in the kitchen. Her eyes soft but steady. I can't keep waiting for you to show up, she said. I don't mean physically. I mean, emotionally, I stood there leaning on the counter, not knowing what to say. She'd been patient, loving, supportive, and I had been a ghost. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to stay present in a life I had built on autopilot. When the door closed behind her, the silence that followed was louder than any argument we could have had. The next day, my biggest client dropped our proposal. A 6-month pitch gone in a 10-minute phone call. And that same night, my sister called Dad was in the hospital again. This time it was serious. 3 hits back to back, relationship, career, family. If it had been one thing, maybe I could have managed, controlled the damage, reframed the narrative. But all 3, there was no hiding, no fixing, no more pretending. I remember standing in my shower, fully dressed, water pouring over me. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just stood there still. The collapse wasn't loud, it was quiet, surgical, like the universe had been waiting for the right moment to pull the floor out from under me. And here's the part that's hard to explain. As everything crumbled, a strange part of me felt relieved, like I had been carrying a weight for so long. I forgot what it felt like to stand without it. Losing everything I thought defined me didn't make me feel empty, it made me feel real. Of course, the fear came later. Fear of starting over, of being alone, of not knowing who I was anymore, without the titles, the roles, the routines. But in that first collapse, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years, possibility. It didn't feel good, but it felt true. A few days later, I was at my father's bedside. Machines beeped softly. He looked smaller than I remembered, fragile human. He couldn't speak much, but before I left, he pointed weakly toward the drawer in his nightstand. Inside was a book I hadn't seen since childhood, his old journal. Between the yellowed pages, a single note. When life strips you bare, you meet who you are. No signature, no context, just that line. I stared at it for a long time. He wasn't a philosophical man, never talked about feelings or faith, but that sentence hit me like a truth bomb dropped in slow motion. When life strips you bare, you meet who you are. Was this who I was? Someone running from himself, someone who measured his worth in external things, only to realize they were all borrowed time. That night, I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by silence, no TV, no music, just me. And for the first time, I pulled out my phone, opened the voice memo app, and started speaking, not to anyone else, but to myself. I don't even know what I feel. I said, voice shaky, I only know what I perform. There it was, my truth unfiltered. And once I said it, I couldn't take it back. I was beginning to see something Stoicism teaches clearly, that pain isn't the problem. Resistance is. I had spent years resisting reality, gripping it, polishing it, trying to control every detail. But when it all fell apart, what remained was something I hadn't touched in a long time. Stillness. Not the stillness of boredom or paralysis, but the stillness of being. I remembered the phrase from Epictetus. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. In this moment, I had no reaction left. Just observation, just breath, just space. I thought collapse would break me, but maybe it was breaking something I no longer needed. The version of me that was always chasing, always earning, always afraid that if I stopped for too long, the truth would catch up. Well, it had, and it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like preparation. The next morning, I opened my journal for the first time in months. I wrote a single line, "Let go of control." I underlined it. That phrase had haunted me quietly before, but now it felt like instruction, like the universe was handing me a key I'd ignored, not to fix things, but to feel them, not to rebuild what was, but to ask what should remain. That's when I knew this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something I had spent years trying to avoid. A beginning that looked nothing like I imagined. Not triumphant, not inspiring, just honest. And that I realized is where all real change begins, in the ashes, in the silence, in the moment when you finally admit that you don't want your old life back. You want something truer, and you're willing to stand in the wreckage until it shows up. Not because you deserve it, but because you're finally ready to stop pretending you don't. After the collapse, I told myself I was ready to change. But I wasn't, not really. What I was ready for was control. Control over the narrative, control over how fast I healed, control over what came next. Because even in surrender, the ego whispers, "You can still manage this." So I tried. I threw myself into productivity. I made a color-coded routine, signed up for webinars, restructured my calendar, even reorganized my apartment. It looked like transformation, but it wasn't. It was performance again. Just a new costume for the same old fear. I started journaling every morning, but not honestly. I wrote what I thought healing should look like. Quotes, lists, insights. Nothing raw, nothing real. Then I found myself overbooking work again, saying yes to every project, every favor, because staying busy made me feel like I wasn't falling behind, like I wasn't lost. But deep down, I was exhausted, not from the work, from pretending I wasn't still resisting. A week into my new life, I met up with Aaron, an old mentor I hadn't seen in years. He ran a nonprofit on the West Side, mentoring high school kids. We got coffee at a little corner shop. We used to visit after work. I told him about the breakup, the pitch, my dad, the unraveling. He listened quiet and steady. Then he asked me one question. "Are you fixing your life or avoiding yourself?" I froze. That's when I realized something: I wasn't healing. I was escaping through better habits, nicer language, more socially acceptable distractions. The ego hadn't died, it had adapted. It had found a way to disguise control as growth. And I bought it. Later that night, I had a dream in it. I was standing in a room full of mirrors. Each reflection was me, but not the version I show the world. One was panicked, another was angry, one was a child crying. And then in the far corner was one version of me, still silent, locked behind glass. He didn't speak, but his eyes said everything. "Let me out." I woke up in tears. I didn't even know why at first, but the emotion felt ancient, not dramatic, just overdue. The version of me behind the glass that was the part I'd abandoned, the part that didn't have answers, the part that didn't have it all together, the part that didn't perform. And I had buried him under achievement, under ambition, under the story I thought I had to live. The Stoics talk about the self as something to return to, not something to build. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." I had been chasing strength by controlling my circumstances, but Stoicism was asking me to find strength in letting go, in being still, in letting that buried version of myself speak. So for the first time, I started writing differently, not in paragraphs, just sentences, fragments, messy truths. I'm tired of being admired. I miss who I was before I tried to impress everyone. I don't want to be inspiring. I want to be honest. Each line felt like a key turning in a lock I didn't know I'd installed. And behind that lock was grief. Grief for how long I'd been away from myself. Grief for the things I said yes to, just to be seen. Grief for the man I'd pretended to be even when no one asked me to. It didn't flood me. It unfolded. One evening, I found an old voice memo I had recorded during a past job interview prep. I played it out of curiosity. My voice sounded rehearsed, smiling sharp, but fake, and I couldn't help but laugh. not out of mockery, but out of love. I finally saw the whole picture. The ego I had built wasn't evil. It was scared. It wanted safety, certainty, approval. It had protected me when I didn't know how to protect myself. But now it had become my cage. That's when I wrote something new in my journal. You were useful, but I don't need you to lead anymore. And I meant it. That became a practice. Every morning I sat quietly and asked, who's speaking today? Me or us mask? Some days the mask won, but more and more it didn't. I began to let go. Not perfectly, not instantly, but sincerely. And that's when things began to shift. Not outside, nothing magical happened, but inside something softened. I stopped needing to explain myself all the time, stopped overthinking every decision, stopped editing every word before I spoke it. Stillness started to feel like home, not punishment. That's when I remembered something else Aaron had told me once. Real growth doesn't feel like becoming more. It feels like becoming less fake. And that's exactly what was happening. The noise inside was quieting because I had stopped arguing with myself. That was the emotional peak, not fireworks, not some giant revelation. Just a quiet moment when I realized I didn't have to fight anymore. I could choose peace, not the peace that comes from fixing everything, but the peace that comes from not needing to. That's when I understood what inner transformation really meant. It wasn't about changing who I was. It was about remembering who I'd always been underneath the layers, the stories, the survival strategies. And when I finally stopped resisting, I met myself again. Not as a hero, but as a human. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Sometimes the truth doesn't break you. It just stands there, waiting like a mirror you've avoided for years until one day you finally stop running. That was me. 2 weeks after that dream, the one with the version of myself behind glass, I went to visit my father again. The doctor said he was stable, but I knew better. Something in the way he looked at me said it all. He didn't speak much anymore. Age and illness had made him quiet. But he watched me carefully, like he could see straight through whatever mask I was still holding on to. I sat beside his bed and told him about Rachel, about the pitch I lost, about how things were changing. He didn't say anything, just nodded. Then after a long pause, he reached over and grabbed my wrist, not tightly, just enough to get my attention. You ever think he said slowly that you became me? Trying not to. I froze. It hit like a punch I never saw coming. He closed his eyes again, like he'd said all he needed to say. I sat there in silence, watching the rise and fall of his chest, feeling something collapse in me again. Something I didn't even know was still standing. On the drive home, I couldn't shake his words. I had spent so much of my life trying to escape his shadow. He was stoic in the old-fashioned sense, emotionally locked, hardworking, disconnected. I told myself, I'd be different, open, warm, fully alive. But in that hospital room, I realized I'd become exactly what I resisted. Polished, controlled, absent. I hadn't escaped his shadow. I had inherited it. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror for what felt like hours. At first, I didn't see much, just tired eyes and a face I barely recognized. But as I kept staring, something shifted. Not physically, something internal. A stillness. And then a voice. Not out loud, not mystical. Just a quiet thought I couldn't ignore. Say it. I took a breath, and for the first time I said it out loud. I've built a life to avoid becoming my father. And I became him anyway. It didn't feel like shame, it felt like freedom, because in that moment I stopped blaming him and I stopped hiding from myself. The Stoics talk about the shadow. Not in those exact words, but in principle, they talk about the parts of us we must confront, not avoid. Seneca wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." The adversity I needed to face wasn't outside me. It was internal, inherited. Buried, avoided. That week I started doing something I hadn't done since college. I journaled every night. No structure, no agenda, just truth. And what came out surprised me. I wasn't just grieving my father's decline, I was grieving who I had been. All the versions of me I had outgrown but never honored. The dreamer who wanted to be an artist. The boy who cried too easily and got told to toughen up. The young man who stayed quiet in meetings even when he had something worth saying. They were all still inside me, unseen, unheard. And the man in the mirror had been pretending they didn't matter, but now I couldn't unsee them. I started looking at my patterns, why I overcommitted, why I avoided vulnerability, why I needed to succeed, not just to grow, but to matter. Every pattern had a wound beneath it, and every wound had a story. I wasn't broken, I was layered. That was the transformation. Not becoming someone new, but finally seeing all the parts of me I'd hidden just to survive. I thought about that night in the shower when everything started collapsing. Back then, I thought life was punishing me. But now I saw it clearly. It was showing me what I'd built on sand and asking me gently but firmly to start again. Not with better habits, with better truth. The next time I saw my dad, I brought the journal with me. I didn't read from it. I just held it in my hands while we sat there in silence. And for the first time in my life, I said, "Thank you." He looked at me curious, maybe even confused, but I meant it. Because his silence taught me something my own noise never could, that we don't escape our shadows by denying them. We transform them by walking straight through. And that walk begins in front of the mirror. I know now. The version of me I was afraid to meet is the version that was most true, not the performer, not the achiever, but the one who stopped, looked, felt, and chose to keep going. Not as someone better, but as someone more honest. Stillness used to scare me. It felt like weakness, like giving up. But now I see it differently. Stillness isn't the absence of motion. It's the presence of something deeper, something unshakable. After everything that collapsed, the mirror, the truth. I didn't feel a need to chase anymore. I didn't need a dramatic comeback or a perfect new plan. I just needed space. So I cleared my calendar, not completely, just enough to stop running on autopilot. I started walking every morning before sunrise. No music, no podcasts, just me, my breath, and the quiet rhythm of my feet on the pavement. At first it was uncomfortable. I kept reaching for distraction, but after a week something softened. The silence stopped feeling like a threat. It started feeling like home. I began writing again, not journaling like before, but writing letters. To myself, to my father, even to Rachel. I never sent them. That wasn't the point. The point was to speak with honesty, to let the words come without needing them to fix anything. And in that space, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. Not the peace of everything being okay, but the peace of no longer needing it to be. I joined a local reading group that focused on Stoic philosophy. We met every other Wednesday at a quiet bookstore tucked between two cafes. No lectures, no small talk, just a circle of strangers trying to live a little more truthfully. I didn't say much during the first few sessions, but I listened. And one evening, something opened in me. A younger guy, maybe early 20s, shared that he felt like a failure for not having a plan. People nodded. Then, almost without thinking, I said, "I think I've lived 20 years for people who were never watching." The room went still, not because it was profound, but because it was true, and truth when spoken from the center doesn't need to be loud, it just lands. That night, I walked home under the city lights feeling free. Not because I had it all figured out, but because I had stopped needing to. A few days later, my father passed. There were no final speeches, no tidy goodbyes, just a quiet exhale. I sat with him in those last hours, held his hand, and for the first time, I didn't wish he had been someone else. I just felt grateful for the lessons he couldn't say, for the silence that shaped me, for the truth he helped me find not through teaching, but through presence. At the funeral, I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Grief came, but not like a storm, more like a tide, gentle, honest. I let it wash over me. I let it teach me what it came to teach, that nothing is ever really gone. Everything lives on in the way we choose to carry it forward. When I got back to my apartment, I opened my journal and wrote, "His silence taught me more than his words ever did." That sentence felt like a threshold, a turning point, because it wasn't about my father anymore. It was about me. I had spent so long filling space with noise, achievements, tasks, distractions, when what I really needed was to learn how to sit still, to breathe, to listen, to be, not to improve, not to impress, just to exist. That's when I knew I didn't want to return to my old job. Not because it was bad, but because it wasn't aligned. So I took a risk. I started a design studio. Small, quiet, intentional. We don't just build things. We build spaces, places that promote clarity, stillness, peace. I wanted to create the kind of environment I never gave myself during the years I was running. Business was slow at first, but it was honest, and that made all the difference. I stopped measuring my worth in productivity, stopped defining my identity by titles. I started choosing coherence over success. One morning, I got an email from Rachel, just to check in. No agenda. I didn't feel nervous reading it. I felt grateful. I responded not with longing, not with regret, but with peace, because we didn't fail. We just outgrew the illusion that we were ready for what we couldn't yet hold. And now I finally could. I wrote back, I'm not the same man, not because life changed, but because I stopped running from myself. No reply came, and that was okay. Because I didn't write it for a response. I wrote it to affirm who I've become. That's when I realized stillness isn't passive, it's powerful. It's what's left when the noise settles, when the masks fall away, when you stop needing to prove anything to anyone, not even yourself. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." I used to read that and think it was poetic. Now I know it's real, because when you sit in the silence long enough, something extraordinary happens. You meet yourself, not the version shaped by fear, not the one shaped by applause, but the one who's always been there, calm, honest enough. That is what I had been searching for all along. And it was never out there. It was always here, still waiting, burning quietly like a flame that doesn't flicker no matter how hard the wind blows. By the time things began to shift, I wasn't expecting anything anymore. And that's exactly when everything started to change. Not in a flash, not all at once, but slowly, like sunrise filtering through a window you forgot to close. There was no big moment, no grand breakthrough, just a steady, quiet unfolding. My studio began gaining traction, not because I marketed harder, but because I was creating from alignment. Every project had meaning. Every client conversation felt human. I wasn't chasing outcomes anymore. I was showing up. Coherent, honest, till that became my compass. Not what do I want to get, but who do I want to be while I do this? It changed everything. One afternoon, I took the train home from a site visit, same road, same station, but it felt different now. No headphones, no scrolling, just watching the city slide by, feeling rooted. That's when I saw him. The same man who once sat across from me and said, "You're standing in your own way." Only this time he was sitting on the floor of the platform, sketching something on a wrinkled piece of cardboard. I almost walked past, but something made me stop. He looked up, recognized me, smiled. "Hey," he said, "I was wondering when you'd come back." I knelt beside him. He handed me a drawing. It was a portrait, abstract but strangely familiar. A figure half shrouded in darkness, reaching toward light. Below it, he'd scribbled 3 words. The unseen self. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I pulled out my wallet, handed him a few bills, and asked if I could keep the drawing. He nodded. "It was always yours." I took it home and hung it in my office right across from my desk, so that every day I'd be reminded. The most important parts of us aren't the loud ones. They're the quiet truths we finally stop running from. And when we stop waiting for the world to give us permission, they emerge fully clearly without apology. That was my twist. My final lesson that I had spent years trying to force change, trying to earn transformation, trying to manifest a new reality. But the universe wasn't responding to my effort, it was responding to my energy. And when that energy finally became aligned, not with ambition, but with truth things I once chased began to find me. Like Maya. She was an intern. I brought into the studio a senior in college full of fire and fear. She reminded me of myself at that age. Hungry to prove something, scared to be seen. She worked late, overthought everything, pushed too hard. One day she broke down after review, said she felt like she was never enough. I didn't give her a speech. I just told her what I wish someone had told me. You don't have to outrun the fear, you just have to stop feeding it. She looked at me eyes wide like no one had ever said that out loud. And I realized maybe that's part of why I went through what I did so that I could say it now. Not as advice, as proof. Because when you stop performing, something happens. You become trustworthy. Not because you have answers, but because your presence doesn't require them. That's what stillness does. It creates space for others, for clarity, for everything to arrive in its own time. And things did arrive. New projects, unexpected opportunities, even new friendships, honest ones. Not fast, not loud, but real. And I no longer needed more than that because I had become someone I actually liked being with. No audience, no applause, just me, coherent, rooted whole. That I believe is the final Stoic truth. Peace doesn't come when life stops being hard. It comes when you stop resisting what it's asking of you. When you become the kind of person who doesn't need the outcome to feel complete. I used to think clarity came before the leap. Now I know it comes after. After you let go, after you choose truth over comfort, after you stop waiting and start being. And once you do, the world starts to respond. Not to your effort, but to your frequency. That's what alignment really is. Not perfection, not success, just living in a way where nothing needs to be forced. Because everything you thought you had to chase was already waiting for you to become the person who no longer needs it to feel whole. And when that day comes, it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like coming home.